Hi, back in session with Professor P. We are now going to begin Chapter 4, Human Variation and Adaptation. I kept Chapter 4 different because Chapter 4 is going to be also going into like culture and sort of like the concept of race. Human variation was created during a time of extreme racism, and what human variation really wanted to say is that race really is not a scientific reality, right? That when we look at human variation wants to understand why and how people physically look different, right? And human variation and people in that field said, look, it's because our ancestors were adapting to different environments and different climates. Some of you might have darker skin to prevent, skin cancer. You needed more melanin, vitamin D. There had to be an advantage to have lighter skin as well. That it was all about adaptation in the given environment. This whole concept of race was a complete social construct, okay? So that becomes important. Let's start with adaptation. Adaptation refers to how species are surviving and reproducing in a given environment, right? It's really important because we go through these genetic changes and we want the genetic changes to be adaptive, right? To continue to help us reproduce and survive in a given environment. We don't want them to be maladaptive, which decreases our reproduction and chances in a given environment, right? We don't want that. But it becomes important. Why do we differ? Genetics, environment, physical and cultural differences. It's all very important to sort of understand, right? Let's get to acclimatization. Acclimatization basically says climate influences how our body grows, how our body develops, the physiological and genetic factors come into existence there, okay? So that's what I was talking about with climate, right? We're going to talk about this in a minute, but let's get to the influences of culture. One of the things we talk about is culture can influence the direction of natural selection. Let's just talk about this. As some of you guys have heard of like the pedong, right? They wear the rings around their neck. They physically change the way they look by wearing those rings around their neck and elongating their necks, right? That is what we're talking about. A lot of us in our own environment influence, right? Let's just talk about ourselves as human. We like to do tattooing and piercing of the ears and dyeing our hair, and some of us do physical and plastic surgery, right? I haven't got there yet, but that becomes very important when we look at our own culture and our own cultural sort of ideologies behind this. All right, let's get to the physical variations in human populations. Let's start with the Bergmann's rule. Bergman rules basically says this: there's a general relationship between body size and temperature. If you're living in hotter environments, you're typically taller. It's sort of like an automatic air conditioning system. You get that sort of heat off. My ancestors must have been adapting to colder environments because when you're in colder environments, you're a little bit more stout, shorter, and robust to keep that warmth in if you're in snowy environments, right? Think about, the Inuit. Think about, Eskimo. Think about people who are living in those kind of populations. But this is happening over time, right? We're looking at those ancestral physical adaptations. Allen's rule basically looks at protruding body parts, limbs, and they do an analysis that people who are in colder environments have shorter limbs, people in longer environments have longer limbs. Again, that air conditioning system. So it's really talking about limbs and size like that. That becomes important to sort of understand. Even like our facial features as well, like the nose length, shorter and longer. Glauber's rule looks at a relationship between melanin and skin color. So basically, people who are living in warmer climates have darker skin because it helps them adapt and survive and not get skin cancer. And people who are in colder environments, right, don't really need darker skin, right? It's not going to be adaptable for them, that pigmentation. So that becomes important. Lighter skinned people do produce more vitamin D, so they incorporate that in their growth and things like that. So it's important to understand all of this is related to that acclimatization. In the book, it even talks about like lactose deficiency. Like some of you guys are lactose intolerant. So we say, why? Anthropologists are curious about that and people in human variation. That basically, there's a correlation between your ancestors dairied later on in life. So people like me who do not have I'm not lactose intolerant, I could tolerate it, right? That means my ancestors must have been dairying much earlier on in time. So over time, my body adapted to that, right? And people within my background adapted to that, right? In my ancestral line. So that becomes important. The concept of race and racism comes about. Human variation wanted to really say it doesn't exist. It really is not anything scientific. It is a cultural ideology, right? That we create racism, we pass it on, we're enculturated with it, that it has nothing to do with the way we look, that the way we look has to do with our physical adaptation in the environment, okay? You also have a couple articles in your module where it looks at how anthropologists, the official statement on race, and it looks at Jared Diamond's Race Without Color. So there's different kinds of articles in there. All right. And as you guys know, human variation, they really want to study our physical, the way we physically look. Why do some of us have brown hair and brown eyes and blue eyes and green eyes and short and tall and all these different things? All right. I hope you had a nice time with human variation. Have a great day. Bye.